Hello everyone and welcome to another STP community webinar. Today's webinar is the Holy Trinity of UI testing with Diego Molina. Just some quick information, an upcoming conference is in Arlington, Virginia from October 22nd to the 25th. It's going to be at the Sheraton Pentagon City, and you can sign up at stpcon.com. There's going to be workshops, sessions, keynotes, networking. There's going to be a bunch of events you can go to after. There's alumni that can save money. And also contact us if you have any teams that you want to send or multiple people that want to come along. The next webinar is going to be compliance and agility, how it can be done with Apergita Mather. So make sure you follow Diego Molina and also SoftwareTestPro and use the hashtag STP webinar. All right, so let's get started. A quick background on Diego Molina. Diego is a software engineer in test at Zalando, specializing in testing tool development and advising feature teams how to test better. He's one of the maintainers of the official Docker Selenium project, and he is a creator of Selenium, a dynamic Selenium grid. Most of his time working with different teams and finding ways to do UI testing in a simpler way. You can find him often in the IRC Slack channel for Selenium. All right, with that, Diego, let me give you a presentation, and you're all set to go.
Okay, so that looks fine. So hi, everyone. Thank you, James, for the invitation, and to the whole STP team, to Smita and to Mike, maybe they're listening as well. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar today. I'm going to talk about UI testing and mostly about layout and visual testing. So let's get started. A bit about me, complementing what James said, and a small correction, maybe the update didn't reach you. I don't know. I'm not working in Zalando anymore. I'm working now on a company called Element 34 Solutions. And so I am a Selenium committer, and I am very enthusiastic about all the topics related to Selenium Grid. As James mentioned, I would like to make a small parenthesis here and invite you all to go to the IRC Slack of Selenium if you are starting with Selenium, if you are already an advanced user and you want to help other people, so you can just go to that link and join the channel and help us to build an even better community in the Selenium open source community. I also help to co-organize the meetups in the Selenium meetups in Berlin and Hamburg. And if you want to reach me there, you have my Twitter handle, GitHub, and email. So before starting, I just want to mention a bit about the company where I work now. We're called Element 34 Solutions, and we're called Element 34 because the 34th element of the periodic table is Selenium. So we work with everything related to Selenium. And we are in Switzerland and in Germany. These are our links to contact us, and we do everything related to consulting, trainings, and also an in-house Selenium grid that can be used for diverse purposes, but mostly for companies that have high restrictions in networking and scaling. So let's move on. Let's check the agenda. So basically, what I want to show is an approach that I did when I was working in my previous company. So you will see that from all the examples I'll show. And the idea is that I want to show not how to do visual testing or layout testing, but the approach we took into the process of finding out what works for us. So let's get into this. So why this topic? Basically because we believe, or when I was working in my previous company in Zalando, we believe that the main components of UI testing are the functional testing, the layout testing, and the visual testing. And some teams were approaching us, asking for help to figure out what type of testing was more adequate for their needs. So just to get a common idea of what every type of testing means. So when I say functional testing, I'm talking about the type of testing that checks, tests, and validates that our application is working based on a set of specifications. So this is a typical given when then, if you want to use it like that, if you have scenarios, basically when you want to check that your application is working given some specific workflow. And this is the one we should always have in our testing. Then we also have layout testing. And the idea of layout testing is that we want to validate that our web application, when it changes, that the layout is working in a responsive way, depending on the viewport size and also depending on our expectations. So if our website is being seen in a small screen, in a laptop, or in a phone, and so on. So how does that look in real life? If you have ever played with the developer tools of Chrome, you can see that you can actually check how your website will look like in different resolutions. And that's the main idea of layout testing, to check if our website is looking appropriately depending on the resolution. Now, visual testing. When I talk about visual testing, I try to say that we are testing or validating or checking that our application, its appearance is displayed properly to all of our users and customers based on our expectations. So the same thing, like if we are seeing our website in a phone or an iPad, that all the rendering is done in an appropriate way. By this I mean that maybe since the viewport is smaller, maybe the CSS is corrupted or working in a different way, that the images can actually resize, etc., etc. There are some challenges with visual testing, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but for example, a few of them that were interesting for us in the process of finding out what works for us was when you have dynamic content in a website, it's very complicated to do a visual test because it's changing the whole time, of course. And in addition to that, you have image scaling, you have the anti-aliasing patterns that it softens the borders of different images and shapes, pixel offsets, and so on. So there are many things. When a page is not static, it's very complicated to do a visual test, but there are different tools and approaches that can help us. So let's get into our scenario. So we were working in this e-commerce company, and we were a team in charge of helping other teams to do better testing or testing in a more simple way. And then a few teams approached us, and they already had some Selenium tests, and they wanted to start achieving a bigger coverage with their current tests, or maybe by implementing new tests. So these teams wanted basically these three things. They wanted to run the tests as often as possible. So ideally on every commit, every time they make a change on the application, they want to run the tests and check that the application is still working as expected. They wanted to have more coverage of their application, but without needing to write a lot of tests. So checking more details, more small things in every single step, but without having to add lots of new assertions or lots of new tests. And the idea is that they already have an existing test suite. They already have a previous setup, a previous set of, Jenkins or Travis jobs that already work. And they wanted to reuse as much as possible all the things they had, because the idea when we add a new component into our testing strategy is not to break down everything we have, but try to find a way how integrate that new thing into our current setup. Okay, so the main question was, when do I use these types of testing, or how do I mix them, or maybe I don't need to mix them? So we started to approach the problem taking one step back. So we were thinking, what should we consider when we think what variables should we consider to decide what each step of testing? So one was the application characteristics, and the second one was the stage in the development process. when I talk about application characteristics, this means the following. If the application is an e-commerce website, if it's an application that is mostly static, like web forms, filling up, application forms, or maybe it's an application that is merely graphic, like, SVGs the whole time. Maybe our application has to work in different languages and in different countries, because according to the country where you are, maybe the price will be displayed in a different way, and so on. And also, if we're going to work in different browsers, maybe some applications are only working in the major browsers, not in some specific on all the browsers. And the last one is actually if the application has to work in different viewports, a laptop, a phone, etc., etc. So this is the first part that we proposed to different teams, and was this decision table. But before showing the table, I want to mention that this was what we came up in that environment. So when I show this, please apply some common sense and context. So your own context that you're trying to figure out. And these are just suggestions. So what we came up was with this. We divided the application types in 4. So when we talk about the dynamic application, is this type of application that is web forms, and they are very static, they are very simple flows. And when we talk about the internal tool, maybe if you are working in a middle-sized company or big company, you have these tools to fill out expense reports or to request vacation, things like that. If you're in an e-commerce like, Amazon or Zalando here in Germany, or if you have something merely animated and graphics. So when we say that maybe and nice to have in these cases, this means that, for example, you should do layout testing in a dynamic or web forms application style, maybe because you should first consider what your user base size is. If you're serving thousands or hundreds of thousands of users, the more safety nets you have, the better. So when you add a layout test for your application, then you will be safer. But if your user base is smaller, then maybe you don't need to put that much effort. You can find out these things by checking the analytics information in your application. If you don't have that, you can integrate easily something like Google Analytics. And you can find out how many browsers are being used, where are your users, what are the most common pages that they're using. And if you're making changes to pages that are very critical, very important, so then it comes into play if the feature is very critical. If you have a critical feature, maybe you should add one more layer of testing. And when I talk about nice to have, is if you have time, if you have enough resources, if maybe the risk exposure is too high. I mean, basically, these two categories of maybe and nice to have, you could put them in a short phrase, like, how bad is it if we screw up? If you screw up, then you're completely out of business. Then it's maybe better to add one more layer of testing. But if you're quite safe, if you have good recovery plans or good rollback procedures, then it's also okay. Okay, so let's move on to the next criteria. This is about the stage in the development process. Let's show this with examples so it's easier to get the idea. So let's imagine that we have these 3 types of applications, and we're doing our agile process or whatever it means in each company, that to be agile. But so we're in a sprint, and then we just want to start working in a new feature. So let's say that we start the sprint and we open a new feature branch for the feature. So we start working on it. Then we start doing some commits. And the first thing that we wanted to do was to run as much as possible the tests, if possible, in every commit. So we have found a way that could help teams to do that, and we want to share this with you. So, for example, I don't know if anyone has played with this, with the page load strategy that is present in Selenium. And you can, it works for any standard test. So in the upper part, you have the normal page load strategy. And in the bottom one, you have the non-page strategy. And what this means is that as soon as the browser starts loading, then the test will try to interact with the page. So that happens when you say none. No page load strategy. The test will try to interact with the page right away as soon as the first bit is loaded. And when you say normal, the test will only interact with the page when it completely loads. So this means when all the JavaScript is loaded, when all the images are loaded, when all the background processes are done, etc., that's when the test will start interacting with the page. So how does this look in the code? If you, I mean, this is Java, but this is applicable to all the other language bindings in Selenium. The idea is that we have in line number 5, at the end, you can see the page load strategy normal. And if we switch that to page load strategy none, then this will have the result that the test will try to start interacting with the page as soon as it starts loading. But there is something that you have to be careful of, that you need to have very good explicit weights. So you have to check them and tune them in a way that they're looking for the element that you need before continuing to the next step. Because basically, when you are saying page load strategy none, you don't care if the CSS was rendered, you don't care if the image was loaded, you don't care about all those things. You are just caring that the flow is working, that click, typing, click again, values there, the test is done. So this actually renders the page much faster, because we're not waiting until the whole page is rendered, but also this makes the test to advance a bit faster. So this is the first thing that was helping teams to run tests in every single commit. Now let's move on a bit. So let's say that the team is working in the sprint, and now the feature looks like kind of ready. So we want to create a pull request to merge to master and potentially release. So when we have a web form style application, we're going to do some layout testing. And while doing our research, we found that the de facto tool to do layout testing is called the Galen framework. I imagine that many people have heard of it, and it's a very well-documented and widely popular framework. And to extract a bit of the examples we did back in the company, it looks like this. At the beginning, you declare the objects that you want to interact with in the test. So the first part, if you see lines 2, 3, and 4, they are basically a declaration of an element with its CSS locator. That's it. And then you start declaring a few rules. Basically, you start declaring relationships between those elements. For example, you can say in line number 7, you can say on star. This means like on every single type of resolution of viewport, there is a rule that says that the width is always 100% of the screen width. And the logo is always inside the header, and the search text is always inside the header. But you can start tweaking these rules to work differently depending on your viewport. So if you say, I am on a desktop, I want to say that the header is always, the height is around 102 pixels. So there are like different comparisors or validators, and the logo is always centered horizontally and inside the header. You can play with all these rules, and that's how the templates, or the, if you can call them manifests of the Galen framework rules work. So let's move on. And how does that look in the test? So right now I had some tests in Java, and I had to adapt the Galen framework. I could use the bindings that the Galen framework has for Java to actually use them in my test. So for example, the first part was I was doing some resizing of the page, so it works. So the rules I declared in my specification are working. And then I declare some layout reports. So first I go to the page I want to go, and then I ask the Galen framework to please check the layout with this driver, and this is the specification. So this specification is, it looks like the page we saw before. And you can say here what type of rules you want to apply to it. Then you continue your flow, like clicking here, typing there, extracting some elements, etc., and you keep applying rules for each page. So for the next page, you apply a different specification, a spec file, and so on. And in the end, what you do is that this assertion by the Galen framework is returning you a set of errors. So a simple way to assert is that you want to check that each report has 0 errors. But how does this look in reality, like when you run the tests? Let's see. So as you can see, the Galen framework is running the test for each layout, is going through the workflow, like searching for an article, clicking on the first one, putting that into the basket, and then asserting in the basket that the article is there. And the resolution is validated based on the specs that we wrote. One good thing about the Galen framework is that it's extremely well maintained. As I said, it's open source, so this means that there is some good source of knowledge in the issues, in the documentation, and it's also highly configurable, and it works right away with Selenium. The thing that was not so nice about it is that you had to write all the rules for the comparison in their own domain language. So therefore, you could partially reuse the tests, because if you have tests written in Python or in a different language, then you would need to switch to Java or JavaScript. But if you already had tests in Java and JavaScript, you could reuse the bindings that the Galen framework provides. So in general, it's an excellent option to do this type of testing, but there is always a but. So let's go into this part. So these are the pages that we were validating with the Galen framework. And the thing is that we made examples of the spec file, checking a few details of each page, but there were still many things left to check. For example, on the left side, you see that's kind of the home page of Zalando. And we checked a few things, but for example, we didn't check that at the bottom, the payment methods were shown, that in the second page where the article detail, like we didn't check that the recommendations are shown. And in the end, in the basket, we didn't check, for example, that the categories are present and so on. So this means that we still had many things left to check, but I mean, you can still add more specs to it. So therefore you can also check them. But what happens in the end is that the size of the spec file you have is not going to be just like 10 or 15 lines. It's going to be probably, I don't know, hundreds or so, depending on the amount of elements you declare. And one of the things, I don't know if you noticed it in the video I was playing, that the test was somehow a bit slow. It's because if the DOM has a big size, then the Galen framework has to analyze it completely, and then it takes a bit longer. So it's an okay option if you want to take it, but you have to consider all these things. And I think you will see it in the conclusions that I think it works better for applications that are a bit more simple with less element, and they are easy to check, like easier to check. Okay, so let's move on to the other two types of applications. Same process. We are ready to do a pull request because we think that the feature is ready. So now we are going to check the three approaches we were thinking about when using visual testing. The first one was doing it yourself. Like we have a big team, we have people who are good coding, good testing, so we think that we can implement this by ourselves. So let's do it like that. So what we did was to check what was out there, what libraries you could find to do image comparison. And the thing is that the ones we found that were maintained or updated were only in JavaScript. So we had to change our test to JavaScript, but I mean, it was okay because it was a proof of concept. So we were still figuring out if this works for us or not. So we wrote a few tests in WebDriver.io in JavaScript, and they show exactly the same flow that the Java test was showing. And the cool thing about WebDriver.io and other frameworks as well is that you have an after test function, so a hook that you can use to actually plug the image comparison. So summarizing what we were doing, what I'm showing here is that we were taking a screenshot of the current image that we were seeing in the test, and we had a baseline. If you can see, like this is the variable, and the baseline had a specific name. And in the end, what is happening is that we are going to do to save a screenshot. So we're having a baseline that is the initial screenshot. We're taking a new screenshot to compare it to the baseline. And in the end, we implemented this small function called getDiff in line 14. And how does that function look like? So we were using the library, the JavaScript project called Resemble.js, and you just have to add it to your project, and it brings you out of the box a lot of options to tune your comparisons. We avoided them, like we are not showing them there because they're extremely long. There are different options there, but in general, what happens is that you can compare one image with another one with some parameters, and you can get back a JSON payload saying with different fields. One of those fields is the mismatch percentage. So what we did as a proof of concept was to say, if the mismatch percentage was bigger than 0, so something was different, then we were failing the test. And then we were saving the result of the comparison. So this is code, and it's okay because we can change it every now and then, but we want to see how that looks like. So this is the detailed page of the page that we were comparing. So we took a screenshot, and we're going to compare it with the after test. So if we can see, there is a slight difference between the baseline and the new screenshot we took, and it's something very, very small. The ordering of these shoes is different, and that's why it is highlighting a difference. And then there was a slight difference in the rendering, and therefore these words don't look exactly the same. So we have to start playing with the parameters that are available in the library to actually tune those differences. And that means that we need to spend a bit more time learning about the library, but in the end, it's okay because we are doing our own solution and we can change everything as we want. Same thing for the basket. This is a bigger difference here and a bit harder to figure out. So on the upper part, there is a similar difference as before, that the words were rendered in a different way. And in the lower part, it means that in the basket, the recommendations, so these are the recommendations, when you're putting an article in the basket, usually on the bottom, they show you what other articles you could like. So these recommendations were not present the first time we took the screenshot. So now we need to start adjusting our test in a way that we have to wait for the recommendations to be there and now to be taken as part of the screenshot. But the hardest part, I think, is on the right, where you see the scroll bar. Since in the second time we took the screenshot, there were recommendations, the page was longer, and the scroll bar was different. So these things we need to start figuring out how to make those changes. So some learnings about rolling your own solution. The pros is that you can customize everything because it's your own code, you are making your own changes, and it's kind of your own comparison library into your testing framework. You have tons of comparison options because the library is well documented, they resemble JS, and you can reuse this library if your tests are written in JavaScript. And the cons is that now you had your testing framework, but you need to start maintaining more code. Basically, this comparison logic, handling all the part where you save the files in different folders, in different directories, handling these false positives, like when the scroll bar shows up, what to do. And most importantly, you need to start create a flow, how to handle the baselines. This means the baselines are going to be kept in this directory, but where are we going to keep them? In Amazon S3 or in Git, or where are we going to store them? Because this is like the source of truth to make the comparisons. And the biggest downside I saw was that what if the test is not written in JavaScript? So here are some links. You will see them in the video afterwards, but these are some links of good projects that are well documented that you can use to try your own solution. Now moving on, sorry. Moving on to the second approach we took was actually to look in the open source options and see what solution was already there to do visual comparison. There are many, of course, there are different ones, but we basically chose solutions that were found around on GitHub or in other different open source repositories that were well maintained and that were active. So if you see an issue created, I don't know, 1 week ago, that maybe somebody has tagged it, somebody has made a comment. So these are the criteria we use to find out if a repository makes sense or not to be used based on its activity. So let's see how this looks like. Using Gemini, it's first to declare your configuration file to say what the root URL is, where the grid is, the window size, what browsers do you want to use, and also some plugins. And then you have to write your test again using their exact syntax. So conceptually, the test is the same one we were using before, but we had to use their JavaScript language. And one of the cool things of this framework is that it brings some plugin tools that work out of the box. So for example, what I'm doing here, I am running the tests myself, or the tests that I showed before, with their browser running tool. And you can see that it's running like all the steps that are shown in the test are being shown there. So as soon as the framework is detecting results and differences, it's showing them. So for example, on the left side, we see the original, so the baseline. In the middle, we see the new screenshot, and on the right, we see the difference. And it's being done for every step. So as you can see, there are slightly some more differences, but in general, the differences are the result of different order in the articles. And going more, going further away of understanding difference, one of the cool things we found in this tool is that it already has a flow predefined to accept or retry this step. So this is something that we didn't have in our own solution, but now we're starting to get some extra nice things in these tools that we found in the open source world. So some pros that we found is that this tool was made with this purpose to make image comparison. So there are tons of comparison options already plugged in, and you can tweak them based on your needs. There are useful plugins like the one I showed a moment ago, where you have like the browser where you can monitor the test. And one of the most important ones is that you don't need to write your own comparison logic, which is already something extremely complicated. And in the cons is that, as you can see, the tests had to be written in their own domain language, and it's only in JavaScript. But it's like pros and cons, and maybe this is not a big problem for you, so you can actually start using this type of tool. Something that I forgot to say is that Gemini is a tool made by Yandex, the big Russian internet company, and it's extremely well supported and extremely well documented. And the last one was to use a commercial option like Applitools. And let's see the video of how this looks. So in general, you have your own test written in any language you want, and you start declaring this object called ice. And you add the ice check to every single step that you want to check. So for example, you say ice check window in the home page, ice check window when you are in the article detail page after doing the search, and do a check window in the last step where you're doing the cart page. So basically, it's like a similar to the remote WebDriver object that we have in Selenium. So we do checks along the way. Every time I execute a step in my test, then I basically do a check in my visual test. So what happens here is that I see in the Applitools UI that there is a test that is unresolved, so it basically failed, and it's showing me here the first difference. And in the home page, since I have a carousel, which is a page, an image that is changing the whole time, then it failed. But now with Applitools, I can, for example, ignore areas of the page, which is something quite helpful, and we didn't even think about that at the beginning, that you could do something like that. And then you can just accept the differences. Same thing here, you can say ignore, or you can say, yeah, like this is okay, this is a tolerable difference, and approve it. And implicitly, we're seeing things that are beneficial for us, because in the way that the tool already has some plugins or some functionality that are beneficial for us, like accepting new baselines and so on. So the next time we executed the test, it was green. As you can see in this, it's not so visible, but in general, it was green because we were ignoring the carousel part. So about using Applitools, as I said, with Gemini, the open source tool, it's made with this purpose. It's made with image comparison in its DNA, you could say. It's very configurable, and one of the cool things is that they provide a lot of APKs to integrate with your own language, if you're using Python or Ruby or any language you're using to write your Selenium tests. And it has different validation levels, so you can also do layout testing in that one and so on. And in the same way as with Gemini, you don't need to write your own comparison logic. And the cons is that, I don't know if they have changed that already, but there is a price there of the test execution time, because basically when your test takes a screenshot, it's being sent to the Applitools servers, and then the comparison is done there and then sent back. So this means that some additional delay will be added to this step, but you're getting all the pros on the left side. So it's a matter of pondering what makes more sense for you. It's a paid solution, but here I always mention the same thing, like you're paying for a solution. To some people that actually only do this. So you're having, like, in theory, some good product like Applitools, and this applies also to the Selenium grid world scenario. Like, instead of building your own grid, you could use something like Sauce Labs or BrowserStack, or contact a company like ours, Element34. And there is also a validation limit in the Applitools contract, you could say, when you get a subscription, that you think you get like something like 1,000 or 2,000 validations per month. So our learnings about layout testing, we found that it was very useful when the structure of the content was stable. This means that there are not a lot of components to double check, when there is not a lot of content that is changing, and validates specifically like what you want to validate. So it's not validating everything, but only the things you declare in the specs. I heard some podcast. I had a podcast from Joe Colantonio, and the creator of this tool, and basically he said that it's very useful when you check the CSS changes and you are redesigning your page. And we also saw that it's very good when you are doing smoke testing in big applications. So if you want to run some tests in production and you want to check that the major elements are well displayed, it's a good idea to have this as well. And for visual testing, one of the first things is that we saw that you are validating more things with a lot of less code, which was very tempting, that you could just basically take more screenshots or do more tests and add this flow into your framework. So it was very tempting because it seems that you could do a lot more with less, but it depends on your own scenario. It makes us feel more secure because we have more coverage, that's true. And the idea is that we should combine our functional tests as much as possible with these visual tests. And one of the most important things we found is that we should spend some time before choosing any of the three approaches we found, like make your own or Applitools or Gemini, like define criteria to establish new baselines. So this means when you get a new screenshot and it's different from the baseline, what are you going to do? Who is going to validate that? Who is going to approve the change, and so on? Because in the end, if you don't define this before using the tool, then you are just going to click yes on every difference. And if you're going to click yes on every single difference, a bug is going to go into production. And most of the time, you're going to blame the tool because it didn't give you some sort of a good result. And overall, what we found is that there is a lot of information. There is too much. There are too many blog posts. There are too many different products. So what was really good for us was to define the first three concepts that we wanted to achieve, the three ideas that we wanted to accomplish in this, and then we started checking the tools. Something else was that we didn't use the tools right away into the tests that existed already for the teams that were consulting us. We did a proof of concept, and it's incredible. People subestimate the value of proof of concept. So do a proof of concept, try the tool in your environment. Don't read only the README file or the instructions, just try it really if it actually goes within your workflow, because this is not a plug and play tool. This is not something that you just add a new dependency and it works. And it needs time to actually have that learning curve to adapt it into your flow. And one of the most important things, again, is that you should try to produce valuable reports. So when there is a difference, give something that is clear and basically that allows people to take action right away. So not just seeing the screenshot and the difference, but a click button on something that says report difference or approve it or something like that. Before you start preparing your questions, I just want to give some credits to these people who helped me in the preparation of the topic, to Leo, my friend back in Zalando, to Javier, who gave me good feedback because he's a visual testing user, you could say, and to Katrina and to Joe Colantonio, because from all the resources I found on the internet, these were well written and brief and to the point blogs about visual testing. And that's it. If you have any questions, please, I guess James will moderate them. But if you want to get in touch with me, this is my user for Twitter and GitHub. This is my email. And if you want to check our company, here is the URL and also our Flag product, the Selenium box. Thank you.
Awesome, Diego. Thank you so much. That was great. We got a couple questions here for you. This first one's a little bit long. Give me a sec. So here it comes. I see a lot of people treat wait times as a means to ensure elements on the site app are working. How do you feel about introducing wait times correlated with app website user behavior, specifically leveraging analytics data to gather browse time session and or browse time page? Tests would be along the lines of, if given normal network conditions, the page elements take more than 5 seconds to load. The test should fail as users will probably leave / churn.
Well, that's that's slightly off topic, but anyway, I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea because in general, what happens when people start using, this is more like a Selenium general question, but in general, when people start using waits in their tests, and when the test fails because the element was not there, in many cases, people don't check the root cause, but they actually they change the waiting time. So if it failed because I was waiting 20 seconds, then I will wait 30. So it's a great idea to check the application performance to see if something is loading longer or shorter. And in those things, you also have to double check where are your things, where are your components in your testing infrastructure. If your application under test is in your network, and your grid is maybe in the cloud, and maybe your Git repository is also in your network. So you have to figure out all these things, like to see what is making sense or not. But it's a great idea to check how the elements are loaded and to correlate them with analytics data that is taken from real usage from the end customers. Oh, it's a great idea.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is, can you use those frameworks with TypeScript?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you see with JavaScript, in many cases, you can integrate it with TypeScript. I am not that good in TypeScript, but I see that it's like a subset of JavaScript, so you can like do a lot of integrations, and most of the ones I showed in the roll your own solution are JavaScript projects, so you can just simply do an npm install in your project and get started to play with it. Yeah, of course.
Great, thank you. Next question. I'm new to UI testing. What are some of the books, sites, or trainings beyond this webinar would you suggest someone to study?
Well, there are. I am a friend of this. I have never taken one, but I have seen like some extracts of a few. I think there are some online platforms that show some courses that like with video interaction and so on, like you can see what the person is actually typing and so on. But I would advise, because it's hard to say what level the person who asked it has, like if has some programming or not. So what the easiest thing would be to maybe join us in the Selenium Slack or IRC channel, like ask all these questions there. And this is a question that comes very often in the channel, like maybe every 2 or 3 days saying, hi, I'm new to Selenium. How can I start? And people just jump and help each other. So you can just Google Selenium Slack, and then you will get the link, or Selenium IRC, you will get the link to join the chat, and you can just ask us in total calm, and we can help you there.
Thank you. And one more. You mentioned Applitools is a great tool to use, and you mentioned some others. What are the major differences, and what do you like about the various tools for UI testing, and which do you suggest?
Well, mostly about visual testing. What I liked mostly about Applitools and Gemini is that I am not an expert in visual comparison. You know, like every single thing that comes up that you need to test into an application, I think that you need to have the overall concept of what you want to achieve. And in this case, what we wanted to achieve was to find a way to do in a simple way, a visual comparison. So a simple way to do that was basically to find tools that were out there. So like Gemini and Applitools, they already have the logic inside the tools on how to do a visual comparison and so on. with the ones you'd find open source that are comparing images, then you have to elaborate this logic yourself. So what I liked was that these tools have that inside them, and they have documented clearly how to tweak parameters to make that logic work better for you.
Okay, perfect. Another one, I've had better luck using Galen framework for CMS testing than other visual tools. The image-based ones can catch a ton of content changes unless you exclude areas. What is your current suggestion for testing a CMS-backed site?
Yeah, that's what we found, basically, that we saw that for applications that have not so many elements, but perhaps some of those elements are containing like text boxes or text fields where you are displaying content like words, paragraphs, or different characters, it makes more sense to check if the element is present in the right position than actually checking all the content in it, because the content comes from CMS managers or bloggers that send their blog posts or somebody else, then that is very hard to check. Like you need to put like a limit where you say, okay, with this limit of checking and validation and testing, I'm okay. And I think it's a good fit. It's a good fit to have layout testing for CMS style applications. Yeah.
Okay. Another one, I'm not a programmer, have been in testing all my life. What is the best thing for me to do to start encoding for UI testing?
First thing is to join our chat in the Selenium open source community for IRC and Slack. And the second one is to pick a language that you don't need to create many files or configuration to start running. For example, if you choose Java, I think it's going to be harder for you because there is this complete paradigm of object-oriented programming and so on. But if you choose something that it's easier to learn, like Python or Ruby, then you could have better luck of having something working in shorter time, I would say.
All right, thank you. Another one. This is from Michael. Hello, I work in healthcare. Do you have any tips on testing environments with many processes, but iterative?
What was the last word, sorry?
Sorry, let me say it again. Hello, I work in healthcare. Do you have any tips on testing environments with many processes, but iterative?
Well,
that's what it is. iterative. Iterative.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think healthcare is a segment or a type of company like insurances or banking that they have a lot of restrictions. And in restrictions, I mean that it's very networking secure. Like you cannot like open ports and you cannot let third parties going. So when you have all these restrictions and you have to like iterate a lot into your processes internally, like to run tests, for example, in an agile way, I recommend to have as much components or part of this test infrastructure in-house. For example, probably you have some GitHub Enterprise solution in-house, you have some Jenkins or Travis in-house, and I recommend to also have a Selenium Grid in-house. It could be, you could try to build it yourself, or you could check with our company. But if you think about it, all the world-class software like Jenkins, Travis, GitHub, and so on, and like Jira, for example, they have on-premise solutions. So why not a Selenium Grid as well?
All right, perfect. That looks like all the questions. If you guys do have any more questions for Diego, make sure you write down his email address or hit him up on Twitter to ask any questions. All right. Thank you, Diego. We appreciate it. That was a great webinar.
No, thank you, James, for the organization and for everything. And please say hi to Mike and Smita, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, will do. All right, so next webinar is going to be Aprigida Method, that's compliance agility, how it can be done. Make sure you check out stpcon.com, sign up, and go to the conference this fall, October 22nd to 25th in Arlington, Virginia. It's the Pentagon City Sheraton. And that's all we have for today. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next time on STPCon Community Webinars.